All right, well, thanks everyone for being here. Good afternoon. I am Melissa and I'm with Advantage Behavioral Health. For those of you that don't know who we are your EAP. Okay, so I've been out here quite a few times visiting and such, and this is my second round of training. So, second of 3 of these that I'm going to do. I did the first one last Friday. So we'll get started. This is very open. This is not about pointing fingers. This is like my 10th harassment training I've done with different companies just in the last few months. So it's the hot topic, it's what is out there, what's going on now, and it's something that every company is addressing regardless. So I'm going through it with you guys as well. If you have any questions, comments, please feel free. We want this to be discussion based. We are doing one group little activity. And there's a couple of self-assessments. So there's going to be some self-assessing. We're not just going to talk about harassment. It's going to be about boundaries, communication, assertiveness versus aggressiveness, those type of things. So we're going to address a lot of issues that kind of circumvent and maybe that kind of feed into harassment and what that's all about. Okay? If you have any questions as I go, please feel free. Okay. So just a little bit about me and why I'm here and I'm doing this. I came from corporate. I worked 15 years in corporate, all the way from supervisory level, entry level. So I've supervised people. I have been a victim of harassment, and I've also been a perpetrator. And I'll give an example that I didn't know I was perpetrating harassment at the time. So I've been on the other end of it. So I'm not, none of us are free of this. You know, we've all said and done things that is not necessarily intended to harm anyone, but it can be perceived and can get a little, out of hand sometimes, but it's just an awareness, okay? So I came from corporate, I work in higher ed, and I've been doing, I'm also a therapist at Advantage Behavioral Health, so I've been doing this for about 10 years. This is like my second career after corporate, so that's why I'm doing this here. This is why I'm here today. So, what we're going to talk about, all forms of harassment. I think people generally go to the sexual aspect of harassment, and it has nothing to do with it. That's just a piece of it. There's very different forms of harassment. We're going to discuss all kinds of different forms and what can occur. We're going to talk about strategies and healthy boundaries for a healthy work environment, not just in the workplace, but outside of the workplace. So if there's issues going on at work, how do we balance it? How do we separate personal and professional? And also establish healthy boundaries in that work environment, okay? And we're also going to address how to prevent these through appropriate communication. What's the best way to communicate without intent to harm, being overly aggressive. We're going to talk about that and then do some self-assessing that way as well, okay? Okay, so takes on many different faces, many different ways. It's not just, like I said, a sexual issue. Verbal or physical conduct shows hostility. We're going to talk about what it means to be part of a hostile work environment towards an individual based on any of the following. So I've had clients that have come in saying that they feel harassed for different reasons, all of these different reasons, okay? Age is a big thing. I have a lot of people coming in for the feeling like they're getting pushed out because of an age issue. So that's a form of harassment. Their faith, they say don't discuss politics and religion in the workplace. It's always going to cause problems. So that can become an issue. Just race, gender, all of those pieces of it. Okay, I'm sure every company, every organization has to have on their website or in anything in writing, any characteristic prohibited by law can be considered harassment. So it's something that is just a standard now at this point. So, why do people harass? Many different reasons, okay? A lot of times it comes in the form of fear. Fear that they may lose their job, fear that their supervisor doesn't like them, fear that another colleague is out to throw them under the bus. Just all different ways they retaliate. It's a reaction, it's a response. So that's one of the reasons why people harass. Jealousy. Maybe, I'm constantly hearing from people in the workplace, these millennials are doing things so different than the way I would do it. I'm at the end of my career and they're at the beginning of their career, and they come in and take over and kind of push me out. Skill level, success level in the workplace. It creates jealousy. People get competitive. So that can take on a form of harassment when you feel like someone else is trying to take your place. Not being familiar with a particular group. I mean, you guys are out there in the public eye. You see all different types of backgrounds, different groups. I'm sure there's different places that you've been to that's considered more of a difficult area than others. You're not familiar. It's a cultural thing, whether it be the language, whether it be how they deal with certain situations. Just being unfamiliar with that type of group, it could take on that form of harassment. Having a past bad experience. I have a client that was sexually harassed. She works in a very highly male populated area, like in IT. And she's one of few females in the whole department of maybe 50 males. Maybe there's probably 3 or 4 females. And she was harassed at her previous workplace and never got over it. She took it into the new workplace before anybody even had said or done anything. She did not let go of that past bad experience. So anything anybody had said or the way they looked at her, she perceived it as harassment. So it was something that was internalized through her, something that she needed to deal with and move past. And that can happen. You know, sometimes people don't get over it. They assume a generalized one situation or one person to everyone, and that's not the case. Okay? And then being raised around people who discriminate against others. You know, we've all got different backgrounds that we come from. You know, I'm a very strong Italian-based background. You know, we're very loud. We have very strong opinions. So there's, you know, it's just how you were raised, what your surroundings, your family, what you've been taught, your experiences. A lot of it can perpetuate into forms of harassment. It's just what we don't know, you know. I don't like to use the word ignorance because I don't think ignorance is the right word. I just think it's just lack of knowledge, lack of experience. Okay, how does it feel? It makes us feel insecure. We question ourselves, our own abilities. Am I losing my, strength in what I can do in my job? Am I just not catching on as quickly? Am I falling by the wayside? So there's an insecurity for harassment, especially if it's in the workplace, and people can make you feel less than. Okay, you're not as strong as you used to be. You lose self-esteem. You question yourself. Why me? You know, we've got all that whole victim-based situation. Why is somebody after me? Why am I a target? So you question yourself and your own abilities. Your self-confidence, again, same thing. Questioning judgment has a lot to do with trust. And you above many different types of work environment, you have to trust. You have to rely on each other. I mean, you have to have each other's backs. You're in life or death situations. So when you're questioning someone else's judgment, this happens a lot from people that have established working relationships for maybe 15, 20 years. And they've had a great working relationship, but something happened, something changed that, an incident occurred, and then you're questioning your judgment. I trusted this person, I thought they had my back, I thought they were my friend for all these years, and now all of a sudden, I'm on the outs. What happened? What occurred? So you question that. You question whether or not you really ever had that person in your corner. And then fight or flight, I have a lot of people coming in that are questioning whether or not they should just give up and go. Do I fight back? Do I fight for myself? Do I stand up for myself? And that comes to do with assertiveness. Do I do that without causing, I'm not here to cause a problem, or do I just get out? Do I take off? Do I look for work elsewhere? Okay? A lot of people find themselves in those circumstances. Do I retire early? Do I just chuck it all and say, you know what, this is a bad environment for me, I need to get out of it? What do I do? Okay? So those are all those cases. Okay, what does that conduct include? Abusive words and phrases. I mean, these can be taken out of context very easily for what people can actually say. Just very basic examples like I'm working with a couple of people that have been mandated by their employer to come in because they just don't get along. And one guy is very open and honest about his opinions, and it's a warehouse, situation. They work in a warehouse, truck drivers coming in and out, and he talked to the truck drivers like truck drivers, like, what the hell did you do that for? You know, that type of stuff. Just stuff, things like that he doesn't consider to be abusive, but he was mandated to come in because the employer felt it was out of control. His colleagues were offended by it, those type of things. So just kind of like the words or phrases that we use. Threatening and intimidating or hostile acts. Okay, so here's my example where I was on the other end of it. I wasn't the victim, I caused it. Many years ago when I worked in corporate, I worked for a big major publishing company. This was probably 15, 18 years ago. And I had a colleague who was a very good friend of mine, and she was obsessive compulsive. I knew she was OCD. We were good friends, shared a lot of things. One day, as a joke, she left for lunch, and I rearranged her desk while she was at lunch.
Classic.
Nice. Well played.
It's never happened.
That's never happened.
So I thought it was funny. Everybody else, all of my colleagues, I'm like, hey, you guys, you dare me? I'm gonna rearrange your desk and see what happens. So I did it, thinking maybe she would get a kick out of it. Well, she didn't. She came back from lunch and was so upset that she left for the day. So I didn't realize it at the time, but you know what? That was harassing, that was intimidating, that was a hostile act on my part. She was my friend. I meant no harm to her. My intent was not to harm. It was a joke, but it affected her in such a way. We're going to talk about perception versus intent. 9 times out of 10, it's not the intent to harm that person, but perception is a different story. So that's an example. Things like that can also be threatening or intimidating, or hostile acts can be conceived as deliberately withholding information. Okay, this happens a lot in corporate environments with emails. Keeping everybody in the loop except one person. So they're all included on what's going on. They've all gotten the email except one person. So that can be considered a harassing type of behavior. Things like that. So it's just deliberately not communicating, deliberately withholding information. Inappropriate jokes. Had a situation, and this goes along with written or graphic material, and I talk about how social media can get so out of control, that type of thing. One of the companies that we work with, one of the managers had just recently gotten married, came back from his honeymoon, had a picture of his new wife in less than much clothing, and showed it around the office and said, look what I just got married to. Okay, showing everybody thought it was, some people did not appreciate it. He got in big trouble for it, and he was a manager. Okay, he was a manager. So you can't necessarily assume that everybody's okay with it, because it's what the standard is or what other people have done. You just have to really be careful with it. So watch the jokes, watch the graphic and the written material. Like I said, social media can be a killer. We talk about this all the time now, how more and more people just think Twitter, so all of that stuff can just be more harmful than good. Okay, so just be careful. There's many people that I've seen lose jobs because of this situation. I mean, especially in education. I come from an educational background. That's the first thing they tell you. Do not have a Facebook page, do not have any social media page, because everybody out there is looking at you in the community. Okay, same thing for you guys. Everybody, you're in a position where you're face to face with the community. People are looking at you. You have young kids, young, adolescents that are looking to you as a role model, that type of situation. Don't put that out there, and people will lose their jobs. I don't care if you're tenured, which is the word in education that's supposed to be safety and security. Not anymore. Not anymore. You do these kind of things, you lose your job, you lose your career. Okay. Okay, so sexual harassment defined: any unwelcome advance, verbal or physical, that or any implied request for favors. So we're going to talk about that whole quid pro quo situation where you do this for me, I'll do that for you, that type of thing. So that implied request for favors, if I do this for you. So, and especially when that person isn't comfortable with it, okay? Especially if it means a promotion or it means something within their job to move them, to get them more money or however you may look at it. Okay. So facts, subtlety is not an excuse. You know, we always hear you made too big of a deal out of it. It wasn't that big of a deal. You know, get a personality, get a sense of humor, that type of thing. So you can't use that as an excuse. You just don't know how everybody's going to react to it. No meaning no. Being in a position of power or authority, we see this used quite a bit. I had a situation where I had a client come in because her behavior changed at work. So her employer asked her to come in because she was very social. She turned very quiet. She was in a small department of maybe 5 or 6 people, and the manager was a male. The majority of the other people were female. And she was mandated to come in because she was not communicating as much. So they wanted to know what was going on. She came in to meet with me and said that her manager was doing these quote unquote one-on-one meetings that didn't need to happen on a weekly basis in his office with her, but not with anyone else. And when she would come in, he would make some uncomfortable remarks about her appearance, about how she needs to be more friendly, those type of things that made her feel really uncomfortable. So we talked about how she felt. We talked about, you know, did she go and bring this to HR? She didn't want to lose her job. She didn't want to cause any problems, that type of thing. So it got to the point where she needed to come forward and express her concerns, and she did so. Well, after she did, 5 other women came forward and said, he did this to me too. So he was a manager in the department for 10 years. He was done. He lost his job. So it happens all the time. So months later, she came back in and said to me, I'm so glad I came to see you, because she was mandated and actually got help. And she said, you know, after I came forward, all these other people came forward, and now he's gone. So totally different situation. Can be construed as bullying. We talk about bullying behaviors, okay? Same type of situation, using your position of power or authority in any type that can be construed as a bullying behavior. You know, threatening to take your job, or threatening to change your hours, or threatening to not give you a raise, those type of things. Those are all types of bullying behaviors. Again, people think this is a male-female situation. It's not. It's males, you know, versus males. It's females versus females. These types of harassments handle, you know, all scopes of it. So it's not just that male-female gender-related situation anymore, which is what people normally go to. It's all different types of situations. Okay? Okay. How do you address bullying behavior if this is going on? You know, when I did this training with one of the companies, they gave me their policy. I reviewed their policy handbook before I even did the training. They wanted me to do that just so I know what their policy was, and so I could bring it into this situation and remind everybody this is what your policy is. And I did this training with the CEO as well, the CEO and the VPs, so they got the same training as everyone else did. So what you want to make sure that you do as a company, as a business, as an organization, you have to establish the zero tolerance policy from the very beginning. If there needs to be training done, conflict resolution is a big training, one of the big trainings that I do. So you want to make sure that you know how to resolve conflict, that there has to be a procedure policy in place. Confronting inappropriate behavior quickly and privately. Never do it in front of a group. Never embarrass someone that way, or call them out in front of everyone else. You want to do it quickly and privately. Understanding that constructive criticism and negative feedback, doing it with respect. You're not doing to put that other person down or to minimize them or to cause any major issues. You want to do it professionally and respectfully. It's always about building self-confidence and competence in what you do. That's what you want to manufacture. That's what you want to perpetuate in the environment. And then we all need to check our own behavior. Okay? So, it starts at the top. They say it always starts at the top. So we have to all check our own behaviors from the very beginning, and how we deal with other people, how we do with our colleagues.
452 is going to be available with an AMA.
Okay. So when we talk about a hostile work environment, This is when harassment creates an unpleasant environment and it affects their ability to do your job. You're gonna see excessive absences, lateness, so there's gonna be excuses where they're not coming to work. You're gonna see them less and less. Their performance worsens, so there's issues with work performance, lack of attention to detail, lack of focus. So it's getting that out of control, so it's affecting their ability. Behaviors are pervasive and ongoing. You've asked maybe that person to stop and it's not happening, okay? So you've, tried to do something about it and it's not working. So that constitutes a hostile work environment. So again, examples, I was in a position of authority and I had this big, huge, contract or something. I had this big, huge responsibility. That's been taken out of my hands now, and I'm doing entry-level work. So I'm being isolated. Your tasks have been changed to menial, so that can be constituted as hostile. Again, that whole withholding of communication, I'm, being withheld information purposely to keep me out of the loop. And then excessive discipline. So with this, we look for consistency. I made a mistake and I got written up or I got called out. This person made the same mistake, nothing happens to them, okay? So that has to be consistent across the board. Situations have to be handled the same way. So if the discipline becomes excessive and it's constant and every little thing that I do is being, picked out and blown out of proportion, that can be hostile, okay? That's where that person is gonna feel targeted. Okay. So here's where we talk about perception over intention. So when it becomes that hostile, the result is one's perception of behavior. Again, not the intent. So it's the acts, it's the words, it's, the behaviors, how they perceive it. So it takes precedence over intent. Again, the intention usually isn't to harm, isn't to cause problems, isn't to demean that person, but the perception takes priority. This is, what we're dealing with these days. So it occurs with repeated behaviors, again, pervasive and ongoing, and a lot of times it can happen with abuse of power. So that whole quid pro quo, it's high risk in managerial. I mean, as we've been seeing out there, when I did this on Friday morning, Weinstein had just finally gotten arrested. Okay, so that was kind of like, and all this stuff is going on. And then somebody else was talking about, this came out, I think Thursday night, Morgan Freeman had made a comment to another woman that she looked nice today. And that was all blown. I mean, it can get out of control. I know a lot of people think this has just been overblown and it's ridiculous. And in many cases it has. It's just, something we all have to be aware of. Again, perception is the key, it's the perception, not the intent of the accused. And that whole hands-off policy regardless of the type of interaction, okay? Especially if you sense somebody's uncomfortable. They're not, somebody that deals with that well. Okay, so we're gonna do a little activity now. Everybody has a handout that has 4 scenarios on it. These are all factually based incidents of either harassment, hostile work environment, those type of things. So I'd like to do it in 4 separate groups. I'd like to separate it so each group has a scenario. You read through it, discuss it, what would you do, and then share with the group, okay? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So, oh no, you're not cool. So, these 3, 1, 2, 3, wait, 1, 2, how am I gonna split this? You guys, yeah, you 3, why don't you 4? You can do that. You have, so scenario 1, scenario 2, 1, 2, 3, you guys gotta turn around, why don't you turn around a little bit? Scenario 2, scenario 3. Okay, yeah, So you guys have scenario 3.
All right.
So kind of move your chairs around.
Yeah.
And then we'll do scenario, we can do scenario 4.
Joe's already done it too.
There's no real.
Okay.
Once they see you.
Oh, we already did it.
They make
Me and Joe
it.
are already
Yeah, we've already done it.
She's
Once
already
you
done
lift
it.
off.
We've already been done it.
We got
Sally.
that much.
That much.
And you feel.
You look good.
Defensive and you feel.
You look
You let it go. You confront them.
Transparency.
What is this example?
Don't want to be recorded?
I appreciate it, but I'd rather keep it professional. Oh, there we go, now I'm not on camera.
Oh, you moved yourself out of line.
She moved it.
Sexual harassment, I guess that's.
That's
I tried.
That's
How you
good.
perceive it, right?
It's not sexual.
And how else?
No, it's a hustle,
Mm.
not bullying, it's pervert.
See, like, yes? I'd rather not.
I don't know, did you give me?
Do you know if you're a real person?
We're just here talking.
That's it, you.
That's funny.
I would not perceive it.
So.
You should tell them to stop. Really, seriously?
Yeah.
Joe saying that.
If it doesn't make you uncomfortable.
Right, you gotta look at it from both sides.
Yeah.
Some people might be okay with
Is
it.
this?
Know the people that you work with, as you're looking through these, know the people that you work with.
Oh, wait a
Fire
minute.
said awful
You gotta
lot.
remember where you're
But
at.
understand, I know, but understand what that means and how you respond, okay? Very close knit, I mean, you guys are together probably more with each other than with your own family.
Yeah.
For number 3, is this a typo or is it,
It's-
just so I make sure we got the right? It really depends on the time. You tell your colleague and they think it's offensive.
No, this is Harrison, so you told your company
Because I
about
just
it,
always
they
use
thought it
that.
was offensive.
Other,
They're
so.
putting you on the spot to report it, and you do it.
What?
Like you told me off on the side.
Right, and you're like, man, you gotta
I
report
would
that.
never say that.
Got it.
Do you do it?
Now I see
Yeah,
where
yeah.
it is.
Absolutely.
Now I see where it is.
Yep.
That clarifies, that clarifies.
Yeah.
Why are you in the?
It's our bathroom, Bill.
Our bed.
Not your bathroom.
Remember that.
You want us to, or? Yeah, sure, you're ready to.
No, but,
So,
so in this
The one
situation,
wild card
you're
is
saying
this,
she looks
and
good
then
or
it's
they look good in the swimming.
We
suit.
moved into
But like,
73 in the excursion.
Yeah.
That host come up 35?
Yes.
Yeah, the.
A 5-inch handle.
5-inch.
Yeah.
So 33 should be
So
fully.
where do you draw the line?
Oh, yeah, there's
Underwear.
what he wanted to know, are we keeping
He's
3
good,
inches?
so he wants to know.
I mean, it
He
is.
said he would like to, he didn't know what to think.
Okay.
D-U-M, dumb.
Dumb.
Oh, there's a B in there?
Oh, man, well, I have a dumb bug.
That, yeah, that's when you accentuate it.
Whoever spelled this word all the time is dumb.
But clearly this person
That's
likes,
my-
you know, they like the, oh yeah, you look nice, so I 50 pounds, they like that.
Clearly, they don't.
Because it says you like it.
Yes.
You ever do that?
I can't be the only one.
Why do you think I repeated it like that?
It's bad.
It's gonna be.
Don't worry, it was not
It's
conceived that way and I was not offended.
Just leave it,
Well, it was perceived
They
that
make me
way.
uncomfortable, no, but it's a fear, yes.
Yeah.
Could involve violations.
Will not be getting in my bathing suit without
The machine in general.
I mean, one of those things,
Like,
50 is the whole lot.
So what, like a Popeye baby?
100% wool.
He's a comedian. We saw different videos before.
You know, those were the first
Yep.
male swimsuits.
They come now, they're gonna get credit.
It's like, oh. He knew it was coming too. The guy was obeying.
We have a video that you can watch too.
Filters aren't filtering that out.
Everybody have responses? Okay, So scenario one, male and female coworker are meeting to discuss an upcoming project they're leading together. They need to meet to discuss project initiatives, designate staff assignments, and pinpoint deadlines for completion. During the interaction, the male suggests they meet after hours at a nearby restaurant because they are so busy during business hours. The female coworker disagrees, feels put off, but doesn't want to offend him. How should she respond? What'd you come up with?
No, thank you.
Start by telling them.
Okay,
Yeah, prefer to keep in the office.
okay,
She should say that she'll work on looking for time at work and come get back to them. She'll see what they can do about getting time to work.
during the work hours.
During the work hours.
Okay. Yeah, and just because she feels put off, doesn't mean she needs to, it doesn't mean his intent was to offend, he was just trying to find a way to do it. Another suggestion that people have brought up with the scenario is, let's meet like later in the day, maybe when the workday is quieted down, we can meet in a conference room and kind of hash some of this out, get some of this done. Or maybe during lunch, we can do a working lunch, you know, in the place of business and work over lunch if you wanna do it that way. Does, even though she agrees, does she need to present an excuse why? No. She just needs to say, even if she is put off, she doesn't need to bring that forward. She just needs to say, let's find another way to go about doing this, to handling it. Okay. Scenario two, this is an interesting one, especially when I do this with mostly males. You recently lost 50 pounds. People at work have noticed and have been making comments. You like the attention. One individual in the department stated they bet you will look good in your bathing suit this season. This individual has never made any type of comment before. Is this sexual harassment? When are comments about someone's appearance considered to be appropriate or inappropriate? Okay, what did you decide?
Well, we thought it was kind of a dumb comment to make in the first place.
Okay.
Just why go there?
Okay.
And then as far as it being harassment, kind of depends on the person's reaction to it, if it made them uncomfortable or not. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you said something about it.
Okay, because it states they did like the attention. So, you know, and maybe that person was just trying to like be positive and give them the attention about it. So when are comments about their appearance considered to be appropriate or inappropriate?
I think that
When
can-
they're not offended by it, or when they like it, does it matter?
That can be tough because it really, like I said, perception is the key.
Uh-huh.
And just, you know, some guy saying, oh yeah, you look nice, could be
Mhm.
perceived as
Mhm.
sexual harassment depending on who receives it. So I would say just as long as you're, just try, don't make any sexual oriented comments and, you know, just be genuine but stay appropriate. Don't say, like if
Right.
someone lost weight, compliment them
Right.
if you want, but don't make it.
Right, you don't need to go there, like you said, you don't need to go there with the whole swimsuit situation, okay? When I did this with a bunch of group of city workers, one of the guys said, well, if it was another guy saying about my swimsuit, yeah, I'd be offended by it. Should that matter? He was like, I would think that was weird if a male said that to another male.
Tell them to come to the firehouse.
I have no idea what-
Happens all the time around here.
Yeah.
That's right on point.
That's what I mean when it says, you know, really it's not it can't necessarily be a gender thing, cause, you know, some people don't, it doesn't matter, they don't care. Okay.
Just trying to put a smile on your face.
So, number 3, you overhear 2 people in the break room engaging jokes of a racial nature. Once they see you enter, they make a derogatory remark, laugh it off, and then change the subject. You tell your colleague what you witnessed, and they think it's offensive and feel that you should tell your boss. Do you let it go, or do you confront the people that you overheard this? What could this be an example of? What'd you guys come up with?
Once somebody else says that they think it's offensive, you're pretty much obligated to tell somebody.
Okay. Do you want that responsibility, or do you just say to them, well, you think it's offensive, I didn't think it was that big deal, I just told you, why don't you go report it?
I guess it depends on if you're a supervisor or not, really. That
Okay.
if you're
Mm-hmm.
the same title or rank or whatever, I guess then
So it's not necessarily about how you feel about it, depends on who you're telling,
Or who's telling you?
who's telling you. Okay, all right. It's an interesting situation because, you know, it's, again, one person might think it's not that big of a deal because it was just a joke, they're in the break room, you know, people talk about anything and everything. But another person might perceive it totally different way. Okay. So the last one I'm gonna go over, because this was something that happened to me personally, and I know, you know, this happens a lot in every type of work environment when people are going for the same promotion, these type of situations. So, myself and a colleague in my department are up for the same promotion. We worked together for the past 3 years, we had no problems. Recently, you heard this colleague has been complaining about you behind your back to your boss about your work performance. Subsequently, your boss has started giving you less work to do and has turned that work over to your colleague without communicating any concerns or reasons as to why these changes are occurring. What do you do? What is this an example of? Any thoughts on that?
Hostile workplace.
What's that?
Hostile workplace.
It's a hostile work environment. Yep. And it's your boss. Your boss taking tasks away from you without even communicating to you as to why, or what this person has said, not even addressing it. I mean, I cannot tell you how many supervisors throughout the years that I've worked with that don't like confrontation. They don't want to deal with situations. So it's something that happens all the time in every type of work environment. Okay? In my situation, I got the promotion rather than this person, and they didn't know my background. It was a supervisory level position that I had achieved and earned because I had previous supervisory experience. So even though this person was internal longer than I was, I had previous experience and they didn't know that. So I became this person's supervisor subsequently, so which caused the problem. So we were colleagues and then I became that person's supervisor. So that can create those kind of issues, you know? And it's not necessarily anything personal, but that, you know, when you're two people going up for the same promotion, this happens a lot. So I addressed it with the individual, and I addressed it with my boss. And actually, you know, I had to prove myself as a supervisor based on my experience, why I had earned that position. And it worked out, but it took time. But difficult situation. It can be very difficult. Any questions on these scenarios? Okay.
In that last one, who would be considered the perpetrator? Would it be the peer
It's a
or would
good
it be the
question.
supervisor?
It could be both. It could really be both, because the person went to the supervisor and didn't address it with me, and neither did the supervisor. Neither one of addressed it with me until it happened. So they both could be construed as.
And if the peer, you know, if they have legitimate concerns and they don't feel comfortable bringing it to you, bring it to the supervisor, I
Right.
think would be the lot, like the appropriate next step. But
Right.
the fact that the supervisor wouldn't talk to you about it before, I can definitely see that being a clear violation, but
Mhm.
the peer one is a little, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, they always say you should really go to the source. If you have a problem with somebody, you should go to that individual first. Because, you know, it's been in my experience, especially in this day and age, if you have an issue with a colleague, the first thing a supervisor should ask you is, did you address it with them? That's the first thing they should ask you. And if you haven't, then that's what they're gonna tell you to do. You need to address it with that individual first before even coming to me. Really, we're adults, we should all be able to handle those types of situations amongst ourselves. So in a roundabout way, they were both kind of guilty of it, because that colleague didn't come to me first, and the boss, you know, made it even worse by not coming to me. Okay, so neither one addressed it with me, which made it an even more difficult situation. So I kind of had to defend myself to both, and prove myself to both. Okay? All right. So what if I am being harassed? Tell the offender their behavior is offensive and stop. Address it with your supervisor if that does not work. If that is not possible, talk to HR. You need somebody to go to for support. We have a lot of people that come to us for EAP if nothing is being addressed, and you know, they need advice from us on how to handle these situations, what is the process, what do they do? And then the whole thing with investigating the complaint. When you investigate stuff like that, you really wanna make it about, the situation and not the individual. So you've gotta really stick to documentation, facts, details, those type of things. Don't make it about the individual, make it about the behavior and the situation and the actual events that happened, okay? So if you make it personal, you lose credibility, okay, that way. You have to really be specific, stick to the facts, stick to the details. When I was in college, I came home for a summer job, and it was a big, you know, a big company, and I was just a very registration, you know, very entry-level position. And the VP of the department, I didn't realize that I was young and naive. The VP of the department was harassing me. He would come up behind me, and I'd be at my computer, and he'd be massaging my shoulders. He asked me to do a specific project where I would just have to work with him, and I thought I was uncomfortable. I didn't say anything, but I was uncomfortable at the time, and I let it go because I just thought to myself, oh, this is just a summer job. I'm only here for a few months, and I'm out of here. But at that time, I didn't realize that he was sexually harassing me. So I didn't report it, and I'm sure he continued to do it to other people. So usually if it happens once and, you know, that individual, nothing happens to them, they're gonna continue to do it. They get caught up in their position and they feel that they are, you know, exempt from any type of responsibility, those type of things. So make sure that if you don't feel, they say go with your gut, if you don't feel comfortable, 9 times out of 10, it's because it's wrong, okay? What if I've harassed someone? Apologize, which I did in the case with my colleague that I harassed years ago. I felt terrible about what had happened. When she came back to work the next day, I said, I'm so sorry. That is not what my intent was. I didn't make you feel that bad. And she forgave me and everything was fine, but you want to apologize immediately and just don't repeat the behavior, okay?
So if you do that, is that good enough?
If you settle it with that individual, you know, I mean, she didn't report me in this situation. I think she knew why I did it. She knew it was a joke, but it still affected her.
But in any situation,
Mm-hmm.
if you do something and it offends somebody, you didn't realize it, you know, to you it seemed pretty harmless.
Right.
So you realize you've offended them, you give them an apology, say, I won't ever do it again, you don't ever do it again.
Right.
Are you still on the hook? Could you still be brought up to a supervisor?
They could, if, you know, this happens, if, you know, there's maybe a little situation that happened years ago, and maybe now, 5-10 years later, you guys are up for the same promotion, you're up, you know, for the same situation. If that person brings it up, I mean, I would definitely, if she did that to me, I'd call her out and say, listen, we settled this. This was a one-time incident. I apologize. You forgave me, you know, now because we're going up for the same position, now it's a problem. I'd have a problem with that. Yeah, I would have a problem with that. I mean, back, you know, 15, 20 years ago, this stuff wasn't documented. People let this stuff go. You know, it happened, you moved on, that type of thing. Now, we're in this day and age where everything, you have to document conversations, you have to document situations. So if you're gonna be going into it that way, then what does that kind of say about how you feel about your colleagues, how you feel about your work environment to begin with, if you're always feeling like somebody's out for you?
So I'm looking at it from a supervisor's point of view. And
Okay.
I guess this is gonna sound probably wrong, but as a supervisor, how do you protect the so-called perpetrator?
Okay.
Because I think that from what I've heard rumblings, the big concern is, well, anybody can consider anyone else a perpetrator as long as they feel that it offends them. So if I
Right.
say hello,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it offended somebody that day.
It's a tone
Whatever, but the point, and that's an exaggeration, obviously, but the point is, how do I protect people from accusations that are frivolous?
Right, right. Well, I mean, I think as long as everybody has an understanding of what the policy is and, you know, what the expectations are of behavior, if that person doesn't come forward at that time, I mean, I would say that they lose credibility if it's something that's brought up years later on. You know, that it doesn't really, I mean, I think at that point, you have to do what you have to do, right? You're required to do an investigation, you're required to go through the channels, go through the processes, and that's what a lot of this is about. You're required to investigate, but it doesn't mean that that person is guilty. It doesn't mean that they're gonna have, you know, consequences of the situation. So, I think in terms of protecting, you've gotta be unbiased, you've just gotta collect the facts, collect the details, weigh with what you have and make a decision. That's really all you can do. You can't get into the emotion, you can't get into the personality issues, or these two just don't get along, that's why this is going on, that type of situation. You gotta just stick to it as professionally as possible.
Okay.
Here comes trouble.
Actually, it's really coming down on there. Okay, so preventing, how do we prevent this? So when you talk about how do I protect, you know, the purpose, so, to prevent this, you know, like I said, think before you speak, know who you're dealing with. You know, hopefully that person isn't gonna flip and their personality isn't gonna change and they're gonna be fine with you one day and, you know, totally be different the next. So think before what, you know, you speak, know your audience, know who you're dealing with. Don't let the peer pressure influence you. This happens a lot with new employees. You know, last time, you know, we had you know, if you have a rookie or a cadet situation, they wanna be, you know, included, they wanna be part of the group. Don't let that influence you and make that a reason why, you don't deal with the situation, okay? Is this something you would want your spouse or children to hear? So you think about yourself, you think about, you know, your kids or your significant other or family members. Would you want this to happen to them? Would you want them to be going through this type of situation in your workplace? So as we look at ourselves, we kinda need to look at that as well. Would we want them to be dealing with this type of situation if in fact it's happening, okay? Think about how your own actions may affect others, so your own behaviors, if you're in a position of authority, you know, that respect level in type of situation. And then again, that whole impact of social media. Stay away from that as much as you can, you know. Don't let that take over. Okay. So as it relates to you and your role, you work in a very atypical work environment. You know, it's a situation where you have to have each other's back. There has to be some level of trust, you know, very safety issues, those type of situations. So that need for trust has to be there. You don't have to like each other. You don't have to have, you know, the same things in common. But when it comes to the work and it comes to the job, you have to be able to have each other's back. You have to be able to trust each other. You know, you are reliable and dependent on each other. You have to hold each other accountable, that type of thing as well. And then it's just especially in your line of work, it's very crucial for that type of healthy work environment. Okay, so now we're gonna get a little into healthy boundaries, get away from the harassment situation and just about everybody's life in general. Okay, personal and work. Where does the work end and the personal begin? If it's not clearly defined, if you live the job 24/7, your stress level is gonna go up, it's gonna affect personal, it's gonna affect family. Having that healthy balance definitely helps your job more manageable and your life, okay? They always say, keep whatever you can. If you bring things into the workplace, personal, make sure it's positive. Whatever makes you happy. You know, we all have things that we do outside of here. We talk about what we do on our time off or our time away, vacations, those type of things. Our own support system. So, rule of thumb is keep it positive when you're gonna share a lot of things. I know, you know, in the sense this is kind of like a brotherly situation, where you're very close-knit. People bring personal stuff into work. You know, if there's problems at home, health issues, family issues, those type of things. It's easy to bring that into the workplace, especially if you feel like you have a strong support system at work. So that's okay, you know, that's not a problem, but you wanna just kind of like make sure that those boundaries, you're watching that. Basics on healthy versus unhealthy, facts versus, you know, twisting things for your own benefit. This happens quite a bit. Being specific rather than overgeneralizing, you know, one situation, you're gonna make the assumption it's to every person or every situation. So making it a specific, don't get into the petty personal stuff, it's not about the person, it's about the behavior. So keep it away from that personal, issue. Consistency in terms of one rule, you know, it applies for everyone, no one is singled out or targeted. Accountability is a big thing always, you know, and that consistency as well, holding everybody accountable for the same behavior, same situation. Perception versus favoritism, we hear that a lot. Well, if I go complain about this person, that's the boss's favorite. They're not gonna listen to a word I have to say. This prevents people a lot of time from reporting, because of those situations. So, keeping that clear in terms of boundaries. How do you establish them? You know, keeping it as professional as possible, holding everyone accountable. Again, these are the basics, being consistent. Consequences of behavior, making sure everybody, there are consequences in place and people are aware of what those consequences would be based on behavior and, you know, those boundaries not being met, and appropriate communication. Okay. So, there is a handout, and I want everybody to self-evaluate themselves on what type of communicator they are. Okay, so it's your orange salmon colored handout.
You're argumentative, Joe.
So we're gonna find out. We're gonna find out, okay? So just be very honest as you self-evaluate, be very honest with yourself, and then we're gonna review these different types of styles and how it can affect the work environment.
You need a sheet?
I suppose this.
Yeah, we
follow
both
along.
need a weekend.
Oh, okay.
Thank you very much.
This, you don't wanna put us in.
Yeah.
So it's the orange.
Did you need one too, Scott?
No, I've already been evaluated.
Oh, you've been evaluated?
Yeah, I seek remedial training, that's why I'm here. But today I made a field difference, so I'm gonna reevaluate myself. I'm surprised what therapy does to you.
I think we were supposed to get this big of a store.
you need to work?
Yeah. I have to walk around with a darn moped now. Who takes notes?
Okay, everybody pretty much done? Okay, so, if you kinda went through this 1 through 5, I represent the first 3 styles. If you answered a lot in terms of yes to, 1 through 5, 6 through 10 are more hands-on and responsive, so kind of based on your yeses in 1 through 5, versus 6 through 10. So argumentative, those we call the self-proclaimed lawyers, my answer is the only answer, it's my way or the highway, I'm right and everyone else is wrong, that type of argumentative situation. These individuals really don't really care about another person's opinion, they just only care about their own, and it's only important to them that they get their way. So that's how they communicate. They could be considered the bully, for sure. You can consider them as that bully in work environment in those type of situations, because they will not stop until they're heard, and they're not necessarily someone that hears others. Okay? Demeaning. This is the person that usually has self-esteem and insecurity issues, and they build themselves up by communicating in a demeaning style. I have a situation that I dealt with, a supervisor that I had that was very demeaning to me. It was a job situation that was just a temp. I was in grad school and I was just, temporarily in this job position. And it was a female supervisor in an office where she was the only female supervisor. The rest were males, and she constantly complained about how the male supervisors treated her, okay? So she would call me into her office and would complain about them, and I would sit there and listen, not part of my job duties, not part of my responsibilities, but I was another female in the office that listened to her, that sat there and listened to her. Well, early on in our working relationship, she had called me in, and I found this out later on, that turnover working for this individual was very high. So, but I did go in and meet with her, and she gave me a to-do list and said, okay, here's the list of things that I want you to do. And when we were done, she looked at me and she said, you can go now, and did this to me. And I had never had anybody treat me or talk to me that way, and I was just kind of taken back. I was older, I was professional, I had been in previous, supervisory level positions, and I looked at her and I said, don't ever do that, please. I said, that's very offensive to me, and it's very demeaning, please don't do that. And she was very shocked and very surprised that I reacted to her, and I called her out on it, and she apologized. It didn't happen again, but I was the first person to stand up to her and say, you know what, that's inappropriate, and I find that offensive, that offends me. So that's an example of a demeaning style of communication. Technical. So this is the person that speaks their own language and speaks about everybody else because they think everyone else is inferior to them. Anybody watch Big Bang? Big Bang Theory? This is kind of Sheldon. That's kind of like Sheldon style. Okay? So he likes to use... He likes to use big words and very highly technical.
What's that, District 313 still, I'm calling Alden for a tree down on wires off the road, kind of step 14
Hey, it's raining out.
You can watch the rest
You
of
can
it.
find out if they weeks.
There's one, obviously, yeah.
So this is the individual that just kind of like talks to everybody, and they're in their own world, how what they feel is appropriate. So hands-on is a very collaborative individual, communicator. They want everybody's opinion, they like group decisions, that type of thing. So they're very hands-on and expect the whole, very teamwork-oriented type of behavior, type of a communication style. So that's it's a positive one. And also responsive is also a very positive communication style. This is the issue with follow-through. We meet, we have a meeting, everybody's communication, we make a decision, and it's actually followed through. So there's a response. They care about what people have to say. They want input on decisions, and then it's followed through. So you lose, again, with that whole responsive thing, it can conflict if people don't follow through, especially if you're in management positions. Okay. Everybody identify themselves with their self. The other thing I wanna mention is that you can have more than one style. A lot of times it depends on the situation, it depends on the individual you're communicating with, so they can vary, okay? Okay, so tips on communication strategies. Be a listener, listen to what that person has to say. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you have to pay attention and listen, make that eye contact. We always say the nonverbal communication says more than the verbal, what we actually say. So make sure you're listening actively. Stick to the facts, set those boundaries, set those limits. The details, what you want done. Make sure restating common goals. So this is very important. It's just a way of restating to make sure everybody's on the same page. We all understand what needs to be done. We're all in agreement. This is what we're gonna do. This is what we're gonna move forward with. So everybody's on the same page. Keep going, Ben.
What's that, Dish 131? Postal alarm for an accident with injuries, 400 Eastwood, near
I'm
Albany,
clearing the road.
481, 452, 499, ahead you do.
Oh, we're closer.
131.
We're closer.
Postal alarm for an accident
How do you wanna do it, Kevin?
400 Eastwood Drive, ahead of clear 14
Get off and we're done, you do control
Let me take it down.
Control S and then save it.
Okay, the only ones.
Okay, I'm clearing the road.
Okay, we're good.
Okay.
You got one company left, that's it.
Okay. And then lastly is make sure you speak up and appropriately, if you have something to say. And then again, that gets into how do we say it, how do we go about saying it, which we're gonna cover next. Okay, so when we talk about being assertive, the whole chain of situation here, passive, assertive versus aggressive. I think a lot of people are different in different situations. I think people misconstrue and they assume aggressive and assertive are the same. It's not the same thing. You can be assertive without being aggressive. When I look at passive, I think of that person that's the yes man. They go along with everything. They don't want to rock the boat. Even if they have an opinion, they don't share it because they don't want anybody to be mad or disagree with them. So they're very much more passive. Assertive is stating your own opinion, but also listening to someone else. Okay, so you're taking into consideration what other people have to say and what their thoughts are, their opinions are, as well as asserting your own. And aggressive, again, we get back to that same type of communication style that's kind of argumentative. They don't listen to what anyone else has to say. They really don't care about their thoughts or their opinions. They just want their own to be heard. Okay? One extreme or the other, meaning passive or aggressive, is often tied to self-esteem. Okay? So a lot of it ties into, and we talk about this, especially if you're in a type of leadership role, is how you are in your personal life as opposed to your professional life. Are you passive in one area as opposed to aggressive, or how does that change? So the last handout is a self-assessment on being assertive. And there's a column for work, and there's a column for home, which means professional versus personal. So what I want you to do is, you can see never is 1, always is 5 with each statement. You want to assess yourself in both environments and see if there's a change there. Make sure you total your numbers at the very bottom for each one.
Whoops.
Rango 5-81 is still alarm for an activated fire alarm at 300 Northwest Street, Arnold Engineering, Battalion 11.
Mhm. Okay. Add up your totals. So if you look at the bottom, and anywhere between 45 and 60, you pretty much handle an assertive temperament in terms of most situations. 30 to 45 is some assertiveness, but you could, need some work, and 15 to 30 you have difficulty. Okay? Okay. Anybody notice any major changes between professional and personal? Scores differentiate? No? Some, but not like majorly where you're totally passive in one situation and aggressive in another. Okay. This happens a lot when people that have to be aggressive or feel like have to be aggressive in their professional life. They don't want to deal with it, and they're very passive in their personal life because they're worn out for being, what they feel they need to be more aggressive and professional. So, and vice versa. People that are very passive at work tend to be more aggressive at home because it's their only place to exude some type of authority, some type of control, those type of things. So it's just interesting to self-evaluate when it comes to professional versus personal. So good communication styles for that assertive person is I rather than you statements. I feel, I'd like, those type of things rather than you need to or you have to. Those yous don't work. People don't relate and they don't really respond well to that. Clarifying and paraphrasing, make sure that you're on the same page. That's again that restating common goals, common facts, those type of things. So make sure that you're understanding everything.
This is just for at home or at work, right?
Both. I mean, you can look
My
at it.
kids don't understand anything I say when I say, I would like you. Well,
Right.
that means I don't have to go get
Yeah.
it.
Right, exactly.
Can't
So do you feel like you're more aggressive at work because you're not getting responses at home?
I'm about the same.
Okay, well, that's good.
I still
Sticking,
don't hold it.
yeah,
I have my own little-
sticking to the facts, make sure you're doing that.
Few times I think everyone's-
And we get into it, it's okay to disagree. It's okay to agree to disagree. You're not gonna agree on everything, so that's okay if you disagree on things. And then listening in return, it's that whole give and take relationship. Okay, all right, almost done. Okay, again, the whole teamwork, I'm sure that facilitates you totally in your environment, that, everybody is responsible, everybody's held accountable, everybody's got something positive to bring to the table. This is a great quote in terms of that respect. Coming together is a beginning, keeping together is progress, working together is success. So it's all about that building, those relationships, and that environment of trust and respect. Okay? So that's what it's all about when we're talking about these types of environments and then talking about these situations. So any questions, comments about what we covered? Okay. All right. There is an eval at the end. If you could fill that out real quick, you can just turn it over and leave it on the front table. So if anybody has any side questions, I have business cards or anything. You can keep the handouts if you want them. Keep your self-evals. A lot of people like to keep their self-evaluations just for the purpose of looking at it and kind of seeing where they are for your